Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Linode and Luna Display. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Vitici. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How are you?
Good. Did you survive your very fast and furious trip to New York that lasted, like 36 hours, something like that?
Basically, yes, I survived, and it was a crazy thing that I did. But it wasn't the first time. I did the same 3 years ago.
I know.
I knew that it was doable. I was concerned about whether, I'm older. Will I be able to survive this time? But as I was talking to my girlfriend about this, we realized I'm in a better shape now than I was 3 years ago. So I did it, and it was fine. When I came back, I basically needed to sleep for 10 hours, and also I was a bit, I felt a little bit weird, moving across continents
I bet
in
you
the
did.
span of 2 days. But 2 days later, I think I'm mostly fine. I'm just behind on all of my tasks, but that's okay.
All right. Well, you're still far, far too young to be complaining about being too old to travel and lose sleep, Federico. I was in New York right before you for the Relay FM event, and I went to their show in Chicago that went till close to midnight, and then I was up at 4 a.m. the next day flying to New York. I didn't fly as many hours as you, but that in retrospect, that was probably not the best way to start a trip to New York because I was pretty tired that first day. But in any event, you're just fresh back.
Yes.
And I know that you went into a lot of detail about what happened at the event when you were on Connected with Mike Hurley and Stephen Hackett. And we're not going to rehash any of that stuff. But what I want to dive deep on are the apps you saw and the apps you didn't see, perhaps, and what all that might mean. Because, the event started out with the MacBook Air, the new MacBook Air, and the new Mac Minis. But kind of the headlining event really, of course, was the new iPad Pro, because this hardware looks absolutely amazing. And you've had it in your hands. So before we get into the apps, just tell me a little bit about what it was like.
Okay. So from a hardware perspective, I think the new iPad Pro looks amazing. And I keep saying this, but I think especially the 12.9 version, it's such a dramatic difference from the old one in that it's smaller and lighter and thinner. 12.9-inch iPad Pro has always felt like this very good but bulky machine that it's very hard to hold in one hand, and it's bulky when you carry it around. And I don't know about you, but I always get the impression that when I look at at a 12.9-inch iPad Pro that somebody else is using, it always looks huge and daunting. But then when I'm using it at a desk, it doesn't feel so big. But then as soon as I pick it up, or as soon as I look at somebody else's iPad Pro, I'm like, wow, that's a huge machine.
Yeah.
The new one, thanks to the reduction of the bezels, and I don't know if it's also a combination of the fact that the corners of the display are curved. So it almost feels like it's saving space on the display, even though it's really not, because it's the same size. But it feels so much more portable than the old 12.9. And I also think that the new design that doesn't have the tapered edge, so the new flat sides, and the look of, the speaker grills, it looks very retro and sort of, it looks like the iPhone 4 design, but updated for the modern age. And I think it looks really good. And the Face ID authentication, it worked seamlessly during the demo. Of course, the Face ID was configured with each individual Apple employee that was managing the demo.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you could add your own face to Face ID.
Right.
But I saw Face ID authenticating the Apple employee with, upside down or in different horizontal orientations. And it was very fast. I wasn't able to test the speakers, of course, because it was a very loud and very busy room.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the screen looked incredible. The corners, it's using the same technology of the iPhone XR to basically applying some advanced anti-aliasing to round the corners of the screen. It's an LCD screen. In theory, Apple is using a new anti-reflective coating for the screen, but of course I wasn't able to test that with. I cannot say whether it's going to be smudged as easily as the old one.
Right.
Also because Apple was using very colorful wallpapers to show off this
Right.
iPad Pro. But otherwise, holding the device, and even holding the device while it was attached to the Smart Keyboard Folio, I think it feels very good. And the keyboard folio, it doesn't add a lot of thickness or weight to the iPad Pro. Certainly not as much as my Bridge keyboard does.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
this
that's a pretty big keyboard. Yeah.
piece of aluminum that you that you basically
Right.
create an aluminum sandwich with your iPad Pro at the
Right.
moment. But yeah, it feels very good. I can wait to get my hands literally on one. The 11-inch, I should say, it's also very good. It's got this kind of strange aspect ratio because it's not the same aspect ratio as the old one. It's slightly longer on the horizontal side. While it's in landscape, it almost looks like one of those old Android tablets that didn't have the same aspect ratio as the
Right.
iPad.
Right. Yep.
But I feel like that sort of disappears a few minutes into using the 11-inch. So right now, my current plan is to buy the 12.9 as soon as it comes out. Then I'll see whether I also want to get an 11-inch. But these are expensive devices, so
They are. They
uh,
really are, especially when you get the accessories on top of it.
yeah.
Right?
So not sure if my multi-pad lifestyle is gonna be all 2018 Pro based for now.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna get the 12.9 for sure because that's gonna be my main work machine basically.
Right.
So it's worth spending the money for because it's what powers Mac Stories and App Stories and the club. So
Right. Well, I'm excited too because, as you know, I crunched my iPad Pro 12.9 inch in June, right after
we
came
remember
home.
that story.
right after WWDC. I think it was like less than a week afterwards. I did that on a trip with my family, and so I've been working when I'm working on an iPad on the 9.7, which is fine, but not. It's nothing like working on an iPad Pro. And it's funny that you mentioned what it's like looking at someone else using theirs because just last week when I was in Chicago for the Relay event, I saw Jason Snell using his at a countertop, and I was like, "Wow, that's a big iPad," because I just haven't used mine in months now. So I'm pretty excited about having one delivered next week. We ought to dig into these apps, and I guess what I'll do is just maybe explain which apps we saw, and then we can kind of talk about what you saw in the hands-on area and a little bit about what Apple demoed, because there were some of these apps that are betas that were actually on site in the hands-on area, which that hands-on area, just as an aside, looked huge. There were so many people, and it had these incredibly high ceilings. That was part of that school, I assume, right?
Yes, it was a very high ceiling, very fancy building. It was not immediately next to the keynote room, so we had to walk outside. And as soon as we walked outside, there were Apple employees handing out stickers with the many different Apple artworks that were featured for on the invites and during the keynote. And we needed to walk on this sidewalk all around the building, and there were of course police officers and Apple employees sort of directing this line of hundreds of journalists. And we entered this other room. I think it was the same. Basically, went around the block.
Right.
So what we did, and we entered into this different room with very high ceilings. And as soon as we walked inside, there was like this installation of I think 3 new MacBook Airs on a stand. It was very cool looking. And then we walked up the stairs, and there were the long tables that you probably saw in the pictures of the hands-on area.
Right. It was fun to go through those pictures and kind of pick out people I know.
Yeah.
You were in a couple of them. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you'll have access to a suite of powerful hosting options with prices starting at just $5 per month, and you'll be up and running with your own virtual server in the Linode cloud in under a minute. Linode features industry-leading performance with native SSD storage, a 40 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They now have 10 data centers spread across the world, meaning you can serve your customers even quicker than before. Linode also has an API that allows you to easily automate tasks and develop custom applications in the cloud. And everything is manageable via the command line. All of Linode's pricing tiers feature hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups and node balancers. So, What can you use Linode for? The answer is a whole bunch of things. Hosting large databases, running a mail server, operating a VPN, running Docker containers, hosting a private Git server. The list just keeps going on and on. At MacStories, we use it for things like a bunch of Slack bots that help us get our work done every day. Also, Linode is hiring right now. If you're interested, go to linode.com/careers to learn more. Okay, so Linode has fantastic pricing options available too. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for only $5 per month, and they offer high memory plans starting with 16 gigabytes of RAM. As a listener of this show, if you sign up at linode.com/appstories, you'll not only be supporting the show, but you'll also get $20 toward any Linode plan. That's a great deal. On the 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's like 4 months free. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, there's nothing to lose. So go to linode.com/appstories right away to learn more, sign up, and take advantage of the $20 credit that Linode is offering to App Stories listeners. Or use the promo code AppStories2018 to check out. Thanks so much to Linode for supporting the show. Okay, the apps that were discussed are what you would expect for an iPad Pro event. They were basically pro apps, and they had very much a design and photography and art sort of bent to them for the most part. There was AutoCAD, which was, I think, just in a slide. And there was Adobe was back with Photoshop.
Yes.
That was just announced not even like 2 weeks ago, I think, at Adobe Max in Los Angeles, where Phil Schiller actually got on stage and helped introduce it. That made another appearance here at the Apple event, and there was an Adobe person there actually doing a demo, which was, I thought, pretty impressive, and we can talk about it a little more. Then there was Pixelmator Photo, which is an all-new app coming from the Pixelmator team. That was on one of the slides. And I know in the hands-on area, there was also a beta of Procreate available.
Yes.
Beyond those things, Apple also they demoed a couple of games, which we can get into. I think we should talk about games separately because that's like a whole nother topic. And then there was an AR thing, which frankly, when I see the AR demo start, that's bathroom break time because I'm not that interested in the AR demos at this point.
I haven't told anyone this, but you know what I did? So I was in the hands-on area, and there were a bunch of YouTubers taking a lot of time to finish their hands-on.
Oh, sure, with their giant cameras, yeah.
With their cameras and their multiple shots. Actually, there were, at one point, I saw an Apple security person walk up to one of them and be like, hey, you need to you need to hurry because there's other people waiting for hands-on time. And this particular guy I swear I waited about 15 minutes for this guy to finish his footage. And he was there before. So he was probably there for at least 20 minutes. Anyway.
Wow.
I was getting tired of waiting, and I walked to this different table where I saw that there was an employee with an iPad Pro in his hands. And I was like, is that a 12.9-inch iPad Pro? And it's like, yes. And I'm like, can I play with it? I actually think I said, can you show me the home screen? And I felt so bad because he said, well, I was actually testing the Lego AR game. And I noticed that there was a Lego construction on the table. And then I just kept staring at him. And he goes like, well, I guess I'll go back to the home screen and make you try it. I didn't want to say I don't care about AR, but I just stood there and I looked at him. I was like,
it's like, no, I'm not interested in the Lego game.
I felt so bad because he was clearly there to demo the game because there was the entire Lego thing built on top of the table. I felt very bad, but also I needed to take some pictures and the YouTuber guy was taking too much time. So Apple employee was in charge of the AR kit Lego demo. I'm very sorry, but I needed to take some pictures.
The Lego, they demoed that at the iPhone event too,
yes.
I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we talk about some of these apps because you got to try out a couple of them. What you tried out both Procreate and Pixelmator Photo, right?
Yes, I tried both of them. I didn't see AutoCAD and I didn't see Photoshop. I assume because there was no Photoshop beta installed, but I'm not sure. But yes, I did try Pixelmator Photo, Procreate, and I saw the Assassin's Creed game,
Okay.
but I didn't play with it. But I saw it running on one of the iPads.
And it's not like Assassin's Creed
Oh
Odyssey. This
no!
is like
Oh no!
this is the card. This is just so people are clear. If you're familiar with that game, this is like the cartoony version of that. I'm not really that familiar with this game, but it's not like the main console game.
Even though Apple liked to brag about their Xbox One S level of
Right.
graphics performance, this was not Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
No.
So I can tell you, I spent a bit of time in Procreate. What I liked best was the Apple Pencil integration. So Procreate, there was a beta version installed that had integration with the Pencil. It's not called the Pencil 2, but we'll call it the Pencil 2. The second generation Apple Pencil. And particularly what Apple wanted to show off was the ability to enable the double tap gesture. So this is a new feature of the new Apple Pencil. You can double tap on the pencil itself to activate specific features. So by default, you're going to toggle one of the options that you can set in the System Settings app. Under the Apple Pencil options screen, you can choose to use the double tap to toggle between tools. So this can be the tool that you're currently using and the eraser, or the current tool and the last used one, or you can show the color palette. By default, you're going to be able to use these options in all of the Apple apps and features that use the drawing mode of iOS. So for example,
Right.
when you're drawing in notes, or when you're doing markup on a PDF document, or when you're annotating a screenshot. Also, third-party developers can do two things. They can either read the system setting. So they will say, okay, so the user has enabled double tapping to show the color palette, and my app will do the same. If it's a sketching app that features a color palette, it can choose to respect that system-wide setting. Or, and this is what I saw in Procreate, they can override the system setting and they can enable their own functionality upon double tapping the pencil. And in Procreate, what I saw was double tap. First, you go into settings and you flip a switch, and then you double tap, and this radial menu comes up, and it looks very cool. You get these options in a circle, essentially.
Okay.
And I think it was some layer options. I can't remember the name, the labels of the buttons, but it looked very cool in that it was essentially a right click. So you double tap on the pencil, and it's like right clicking on a Mac to get multiple options contextual to what you're currently doing. So
yeah,
I was thinking about that, and I wonder if maybe there's potential for even non-drawing apps,
yes,
or non-sketching apps to use this, because the pencil is right there. It's attached to the iPad Pro. It's going to be easier to carry than the first generation pencil. So it could be used, I don't know, even in something like Bear, which adds a sketching mode, but productivity apps could maybe use the pencil as a way to enable shortcuts or contextual options that can save you a bit of time. But anyway,
it could,
the Procreate demo
right.
was very
I
cool.
was going to say it could replace essentially the menu system that you would have in a Mac, right? I mean, but it's contextual. It's like the right click thing, but as we know, right clicking menus are usually duplicated in the menu of Windows and on the Mac as well.
Yeah, right. So that was the first one, and then I tried very briefly Pixelmator Photo. I think my understanding of this app is that it's going to enable some of the features of Pixelmator Pro from the Mac. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, they have a preview page up on their website that I wrote about on Mac Stories recently, and it looks, I mean, I did a screenshot of Pixelmator Pro, which is the Mac app, and Pixelmator Photo, which is the iPad app, and there are many of the same features there, like especially when you're looking at the effects that you can apply to a photo. It's going to be very familiar to anyone who has used the app on the Mac. It has a lot of the very recently incorporated features to the Mac version, like machine learning based cropping and machine learning based effects that can be applied to photographs. All that stuff is there as well. You know, all kinds of sliders to adjust color and brightness and exposure and white balance and all those sorts of things. It looks very different than the current Pixelmator that you can get on iOS, which really hasn't been actively developed since Pixelmator Pro came out on the Mac last November. And at the time, if you remember, Federico, they teased that they were going to do an iPad app, and we've been waiting for almost a year now, and this is finally it. And this app is iPad only. This is not going to be available on the iPhone. It'll be interesting to see if Pixelmator does anything on the iPhone, because the old iOS app does run on the iPhone.
Yeah, that's what I saw, the machine learning improvements and the photo modifications. It was, of course, very, very fast on these new iPad Pros. I wonder what performance is going to be like on older hardware, but from what I saw, it looked incredible. Of course, it kind of helped that the pictures that were loaded into the app were also very beautiful pictures.
Right. That always helps.
That always helps. I think I wonder what's it going to be like with my blurry shots of my dogs running around.
Right.
We'll see. I'm sure we'll have a review on Mac Stories when it comes out, hopefully.
Yeah, I should mention that it also handles RAW files, so it can handle big files, big images, and do all this machine learning and other adjustments to those photos as well. I don't think that's not uncommon with high-end photography apps on iOS, but Pixelmator Photo will absolutely handle raw images as well. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by our friends at Lunar Display. Have you ever looked at your iPad and wished you could use it as a second display for your Mac? Luna Display lets you do just that. And it makes sense, right? Your iPad already has a gorgeous display, and you can always use some extra space when you're working on your Mac. Luna Display provides crystal clear image quality, reliable performance, and wireless flexibility. You just pop in a little piece of hardware into your Mac, and you're good to go. And if you don't have access to Wi-Fi, no worries. You can always connect with USB. When using Luna Display, you can set up your workspace anywhere, so you can be productive at the office, in the studio, or on the go. You get more screen real estate without the expense of buying a new screen. Luna Display also acts as a complete extension of your Mac. It supports your external keyboard as well as your Apple Pencil, plus touch interactions, so you can interact with your Mac with a swipe of a finger. I love the Luna Display because it provides me with the freedom to get away from my desk. I may be working on something on my Mac already, but I can move around the house and sit outside if I want, where I have Wi-Fi too, still using my Mac straight from my iPad. Also, the Luna Display is amazingly portable. It's this little nubbin that plugs into your Mac via USB or mini DisplayPort. Just run an app on your Mac and your iPad to connect the two, and you're all set. It feels like magic. Listeners of App Stories can get an exclusive 10% discount on Luna Display. Just go to lunadisplay.com and enter the promo code AppStories at checkout. Again, that's lunadisplay.com, and the promo code is AppStories for 10% off the Luna Display. Our thanks to Luna Display for their support of this show.
So that's about it for what I saw, primarily 2 demos, but I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about gaming and something that Apple said about games and what the new iPad Pro might mean for gaming going forward on iOS. But also I want to talk about Apple's own apps and iOS 13 that we may see next year. And I want to start with gaming real quick. Personally, I didn't like that sentence about the new iPad Pro offers Xbox One S level graphics quality, because I think while the statement may be correct in that the CPU and the GPU offer that kind of performance,
right,
I think the message is kind of hollow. I think it's something that they can say about performance, but it doesn't necessarily apply to Apple's own view of the gaming industry.
Yeah, it's a meaningless statement in the context of Apple's place in the gaming industry.
Exactly. Saying that you offer Xbox One S level of graphics doesn't mean that the App Store ecosystem also offers Xbox One level of games catalog.
Right.
It also doesn't mean that you offer a serious controller. The Xbox One controller is one of the best controllers I've ever used. the situation for serious gaming on iOS is so bad. The MI5 specification doesn't even support basic things like clicking on the analog sticks, for example, what you might call the L3 and R3 buttons on an Xbox or PlayStation. But most of all, it's the fact that on iOS, we don't get the same games that you can get on consoles. So even though you may say these are the same graphics as an Xbox One, those are the same graphics for mobile games. I found it so ironic that during the same keynote, there's a company bragging about Xbox One S level of graphics while showing a cartoony version of Assassin's Creed. I feel like that's the perfect example of what I didn't like about that sentence. That yes, your GPU is very good and it's very powerful, and I think that's awesome. Honestly, that Apple is able to put that kind of power into this tiny chip that they make, but also you don't have the games to back up that statement because
you can't say it's Xbox One S level graphics and then show the cartoon version of Assassin's Creed. If they had come out and shown Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and a controller and things like that, okay, maybe, but these were not, that was not a game that that it was just like in such stark contrast to the statement that it was kind of humorous.
They did show the NBA 2K game.
Yes, and it looked very good.
It looked very good, but that feels like an isolated case. I think it's pretty obvious, and we talked about this many times before, that iOS can be a great platform for games. This is not to say that there are no excellent games on iOS, because there are, but also, as someone who owns multiple iOS devices and all of the consoles that are currently available,
yes,
I think it's pretty obvious that multi-platform console games are not coming out on iOS for many reasons. One of them could have been graphics performance. I don't think, Apple doesn't think that's a problem anymore. But the main problem is the fact that it's impossible for these companies to ask for $80 for an App Store games. Some are trying. I mean, there's a Civilization, right, on iOS now.
Right.
But that's one game. And I just don't think that even though the new iPad Pros will have a GPU that's comparable to what you can get on an Xbox One S, I don't think that will mean that companies will now rush to release console quality games on the App Store for many reasons, including pricing difficulties or controller support, to name two. And also the fact that Apple, rightfully so, because it's their business, it's their platform, they can do what they want, but they seem to prefer freemium games that, of course, make them more money because people keep buying in-app purchases. And there are more, they're easier to download for people because they're free games. They offer in-app, downloads that people, can buy over time. I just got a bad feeling from that sentence in the context of what gaming actually looks like on the App Store. That's all.
Right. Well, and look, you and I feel very similarly about this. I for the 10th anniversary of the App Store, did our article on the history of iOS gaming, and I actually came away from writing that feeling pretty pessimistic about the future of gaming on iOS. Not that it's not already good in some respects. I mean, you're right. There are a lot of good games on iOS, but they're casual games. I was pessimistic about the fact that there's potential for it to be something more, but I don't see it ever being anything more, at least not in the near future. Another issue that I would point out is that while this iPad Pro may have the graphics to run something that approaches console quality, it's just the iPad Pro. There's all the other iPads, there's all the levels of iPhones. I just don't see game companies making games that only scale to the iPad Pro. It's going to be, if they're going to be on iOS, it's going to be something that works on all devices. And maybe you can kind of have a progressive, have it developed in a way that, kind of gracefully works with each of those different CPUs and GPUs and all those different devices. But I don't think we're ever going to see games that are like, this is like an iPad Pro exclusive console level game. I just don't think that's really in the cards. Apple, I think, fell into gaming really with the App Store being so popular, and they seem to be content with the casual type games that are on there. And I'm a big fan of a lot of those games. I don't mean to really be too hard on the good games that are on iOS, but the more, I guess you'd call it, traditional console type games is not something that's really a reality on iOS, and I really don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah. Let's talk about what Apple showed for the iPad Pro, which is essentially nothing when it comes to their own Pro apps.
Right.
I was expecting Apple to show off at least one new Apple app for the iPad Pro. I was expecting, considering the venue, Logic or
Right.
Final Cut, or at least some serious enhancements to existing apps on the new iPad Pro. And while it is possible that when the new iPad Pro launches, there's going to be some software updates to enable new features on existing apps on the App Store, I think if Apple had a major announcement, it would have been on stage. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the lack of serious apps like Logic or Final Cut Pro or Xcode on iPad Pro? And do you believe that Apple is waiting for iOS 13 to bring these apps to iPad?
I think that they are. I would have liked to have seen them myself. I did go back and look at both the original iPad introduction in 2010 and the iPad Pro introduction in 2015. And it's interesting because in 2010, iWork was a big part of that presentation. And that was Apple saying, hey, this new iPad, this is for serious productivity and business type stuff. But when they did the iPad Pro in 2015, it was very much like what we saw earlier this week. There was Adobe, and there was an anatomy app, and there was Microsoft, and they were all third-party apps. And that's very close to what we saw this past week. I guess being optimistic, I hope that the reason we didn't see that is because they're waiting until next year, because Apple is kind of in this TikTok schedule release with hardware one year and software the next, or at least it seems to be. That's where things are going. And I'm hoping that what that means is with iOS 13, we'll see things like support for external storage and other things that will allow people to manipulate really large files, whether that's a Logic project or video in Final Cut Pro, or maybe even Xcode. I mean, it would be really interesting to see that, but I really do feel as though that's the next shoe that's got to drop, and it's got to drop by next WWDC, because this hardware feels to me like it's meant to take the Pro apps that we already have that one step further to something that's got even more complex controls and can handle things like just really big files. And Photoshop feels like it's going in that direction, but I think it will be helpful to have Apple with a first-party app push that as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think even it's problematic that Apple is not showing off new Pro software for the iPad Pro, because while on one hand they're showing off this beautiful hardware, this powerful hardware, they're not backing up that promise with their own software. They're just saying, we make the screen, we make this computer, but it's up to developers to make Pro apps. And while that's fine, because the beauty of iOS is that there's so much choice on the App Store when it comes to apps, I think it would be an even stronger message if Apple were to say, we believe in this platform so much, we make Final Cut for it, or we make Logic for it now, because it can run those apps. But I think it's a sort of a chicken and egg problem, in that until iOS gets more powerful and more extensible, you're going to end up with lighter versions of Logic and Final Cut Pro, because again, you don't have basic things like access to external drives for backup or for importing files. The fact that the iPad Pro is switching from Lightning to USB-C, I feel like that's a powerful message. That's saying, I'm a computer now. I'm not a big iPhone.
Right.
But again, that's only the hardware. It's like it always feels like the hardware is always at least a couple of steps ahead of the software with the iPad Pro. And it's this dance of new hardware comes out and then we need to wait for the software, and then new hardware comes out and the software needs to catch up again. I want to believe that iOS 13 will offer a cohesive message for the iPad and for the iPad Pro in particular, saying we now have software that fully takes advantage of USB-C, that fully takes advantage of the CPU and GPU. Because I really believe that while it's great that I can go on the App Store and download whatever I want, I think it's kind of absurd that I cannot have an advanced version of iMovie or a Final Cut from Apple. I need to go find something like LumaFusion, which is an excellent app, but it should really be made by the platform owner, because the same company makes the same Pro apps for the Mac, but they don't make the same Pro apps for the iPad Pro, which has Pro in its own name.
Right.
This has always been an argument and sort of the main point of criticism for the iPad platform, that Apple doesn't make the same apps or apps with the same features as the Mac. But I feel like this has become even more of a problem with the iPad Pro, and especially with this generation of iPad Pro, which hasn't come out yet, but it's already clear. You have this powerful hardware, you have USB-C, but you're not making Pro apps, and the existing apps that are pre-installed on the iPad are not as powerful as the counterparts on the Mac. You don't need to look any further than Safari or Mail or Calendar, for example, to see the differences in functionality between the Mac and iOS, or not to mention Finder compared to Files. So
Right.
we need a lot of updates in terms of software, I think.
Yeah, we really do. And, you're talking about a device that's incredibly expensive. And so people need a justification to buy it. And having those Pro apps available is one of the justifications for doing that. We're already seeing Geekbench scores that are rivaling some of the MacBook Pros. This is a really powerful device, and we need Pro apps to back it up. And I think the other thing is that Apple putting out its own first-party Pro apps, it's the kind of thing that captures the imagination of other developers, and I think really helps kind of encourage and extend that Pro app ecosystem even further than it already is today. All right, Federico, I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this a lot in the coming months, and I look forward to getting my hands on some of these Pro apps so that we can start testing them out and reviewing them on the site. That's going to be it for today. Thanks again to our sponsors, Lunar Display and Linode. As usual, you can find me and Federico over at macstories.net writing away, and you can find Federico over on Twitter. He's at Vitici, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.